Welcome, Professor Taddeo. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you so much, Clara. So my name is Mariarosaria Taddeo. I am an associate professor at the University of Oxford at the Oxford Internet Institute, where I co-direct the Digital Ethics Lab. My work in Oxford is at the crossroads between ethical analysis, digital innovation, and governance. And the idea is to understand the conceptual changes that the digital revolution has brought about, and trying to use this understanding to identify good uses and bad uses of the digital, and then help the governance, the policy making, to make sure that we can harness the potential and mitigate the risks, the ethical risks posed by digital technologies. I also have another hat. I work with the DSTL, which is the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory of the Ministry of Defence in the UK, where I lead a project on the development of ethical guidelines for the use of AI for security and defence purposes.
But what influenced you? What made you the person you are in that position?
Wow. Well, several things I would like to say. So the first thing is I think I was born this way, that's to put it bluntly, the research for the truth, the conceptual truth. So understanding how things are, and then trying to see whether this understanding of the things can help us to change the world. So it's a very ambitious project. Not that I think I'm going to change the world by myself, but I think that understanding helps in making the world a better place. And then biographically, there were a few steps which were quite important. One was to go to Berlin as an Erasmus student almost 20 years ago, I'm afraid. And in Berlin, there were two key aspects that became clear to me. The first was that philosophy is not history of philosophy, and it's really about understanding new things, design new theories. And that was a big difference with respect to the philosophy I was studying back in Bari. And so when I got back to Bari, I was more determined to become a philosopher and not an historian of philosophy. And then in Berlin, the other thing was, because I met a lot of people, students who were coming from other countries and were working and studying and developing their own path, well, that burst the bourgeoisie bubble where I was coming from and made me think, well, I can do the same thing. And that meant that I could choose to come to Oxford and study while working and trying to make my way. So these are the two aspects, I would say. Deciding to move out from Italy, I'm afraid, and understanding that a philosophy that changed the world is possible and that I could try to do it.
And what is so special about Oxford, as it enabled you to do things you could not have done elsewhere? Is it something really special there?
So there are a few, well, Oxford is special in many ways. I mean, there is a tradition and there are colleges, and whoever has watched Harry Potter, which was filmed here, might have a sense of why Oxford is special in that way. To me, it was special because in Oxford, the philosophy that was developed when I first got here for the first time, we're talking about 15 years ago, was already a philosophy that was trying to intersect technology and conceptual thinking. There was a research group at the time which was called the Information Ethics Group. And so there was already a space where this kind of interest about understanding what reality was becoming and trying to shape this new reality was already there. So this was important. The other thing that was important, and I'm not sure whether this is institutional or more related to the people I was lucky to meet at the time, I was given a voice. I could speak my mind. I could write a paper. People would let me to write a paper and improve, and there still is a lot of improvement. There was even more to improve at the time, but that was never treated in a kind of a patronizing, undermining way. So research ideas were research ideas, and if they came from me, it was just an undergrad study, students from Italy, they wouldn't be less relevant as long as they were good. So I got the chance, for example, to publish a paper even before I graduated at the time in a research journal. And that was important because students in Italy are treated in this kind of patronizing, diminishing way. You dare to learn, you need to respect, and you're in a passive kind of a sponge mode, you absorb. Here I was challenged to contribute and provide, and that was challenging, difficult, but also very exciting. And for me, that was the special part that Oxford brought.
Since you are in Great Britain, would you like to share your thoughts about Brexit?
It's a total disaster. It's the most unfortunate path that I believe the history of this country could have taken. It is unfortunate because Brexit is a move from the 19th century, not even the 20th century. It's the idea that a nation is something that stays within boundaries. And it's not what it is these days, and it's not what it should be. It's a way of cutting the link with the European culture, which is the culture to which even the UK belongs. It's a culture that the UK has contributed to shape. I mean, if you think about movies, photographs, the Beatles, they started off in Liverpool, but actually they actually became famous in Hamburg. How can you think that something stays in one corner of the world and doesn't actually contaminate the rest? So, and yeah, it's a political and historical turn that has saddened me a lot and disappointed me a lot, because doesn't mirror the Britain culture or the English culture I came to know in Oxford, for example, where you have different cultures and different people, and everybody is respected for what they can contribute to society. It hinges on values like imperialism or nationalism, which are profoundly wrong. And I hope that this mistake can be rectified soon, but I'm worried that there is a lesson to be learned there, and it will be a lesson that will be learned in the hardest possible way, I'm afraid. But hopefully we'll come back the British will go back to their senses and rejoin you.
Let's hope that. And what do you enjoy most about working in cyber and technology?
Oh, several things. One thing is, going back to the previous point, is that I write original theories. I do research that advances, even if for a tiny bit, human understanding of reality. And that is what drives me in the morning, let's say, from my coffee table to my desk. So this is an important element. The other element is that it allows me to be a philosopher who does not stay in a bubble, so to speak. I work with policymakers, I work with militaries, I work with engineers, data scientists. So there is a very much of a multidisciplinary environment. I don't even like the word multidisciplinary. It's more like an environment in which ideas, intuition can come from very different corners, and they can be like little sparkles that lead to a great deal of understanding. And that's what I like the most. It's like creating this roundabout of interesting ideas and expertise that somehow work together.
Yeah, for this work is funding very important. But it's always also a struggle. Can you tell us what that involves?
Finding money.
Funding, yeah, financing projects.
So academia is funding in academia, especially in the area of humanities, social sciences, can be hard. And Brexit is going to make it harder for us in the UK, because Europe has been a huge provider of funding in this contest. The struggle is to navigate a very difficult path, because to find support or fund to your research, you need to find something which is original, new, but also not so original and not so new that people who are supposed to fund you don't understand it. So you need to be original, but just enough. Funding comes with a great responsibility when it's especially public funding. It has to have some kind of feedback on society. There has to be some kind of impact on society. And so one of the difficulty, well, it's not a difficulty, but it's an exercise that you have to do all the time. It's time to make sure that you develop ideas which are not just interesting. That's what I tell my students all the time. Interesting is okay, but it's not enough. It has to be relevant. So trying to do something that has an impact on society, and hopefully will leave society in a better place once the research is done. So it's these are the two Cartesian axes, as it were, in which funding, that I use to try to develop funding in my area of work.
But now something basic. Why does science matter?
Oh, you remember Dante. We were not made to live like beasts. That's why science matters. Science is the way we make sense of the world. Science is there to tell us what reality is. And if we don't know what reality is, we cannot navigate reality. We can live in reality, we can exist in reality, like animals do, yes. We might even enjoy reality, but we will never understand it, and we will never be able to improve it. So science matters, to put it bluntly, because truth matters. And as much as post-truth and postmodernism might push us to believe that there are different truths and different ways of defining truth, there is a basic state of fact, state of the world, that is very complex, and understanding it, it's a key part of the human endeavor. And one more thing I would like to add is that science matters precisely because of this strong connection with the human nature. If you think about science, science is never definitive. It tells you a truth, but then improves, refines, corrects itself, changes, right? So Aristotle was doing science, Newton was doing science, and the results of their research is totally different. That's part, is actually like the way of representing human nature, this constant evolving, refining, improving. So to some extent, science is important to understand the world, but it's also one of the best way of representing the effort to exist as human beings, in my mind.
And the next question that is related is, why does technology need ethics?
Because technology is not, especially these technologies, the digital technologies, but technologies are not just tools. They are tools to do things. And things can be, that we can do with tools, can be morally good and morally evil. The classic example, no, you have a knife to cut a steak and you use the knife to kill someone. So technology is never neutral insofar as it is a tool to perform actions. And so you want to make sure that we design it and use it in ways that favor the good outcomes and not the morally evil outcomes. Digital technologies more so than compared to other technologies, because digital technologies, they are not just providing us with tools to, this meeting today, we learned a lot about the potential of the digital, but they are changing the world around us. The example I often make is think about cyber warfare. Now, since day one, as humans, we've waged conflict and war against each other. Unfortunately, it's one of the bad sides of our species, I think, as well. The concept of war so far has been like a concept which couples aggression and physical violence. You need to destroy something, to kill someone, to wound someone, to win the war. And we have regulated war with this assumption, violence and aggression together. Now think about cyber. Cyber conflicts are a phenomenon which is happening thanks to the digital. But the concept of cyber warfare is not the same of conventional warfare, because you have aggression, but you don't have violence. And so how do you regulate a war which is not physical anymore, but can still cause a lot of damage? Now, this is a redefining of reality, which the digital brings about. The changes and the consequences are huge. If we don't understand these changes, and if we don't try to shape them with ethical visions, we won't be in control of the consequences when the consequences are so radical. And so that's why we need an ethics of technology to make sure that technology takes us to the place in which we want to end up, and not in some other random place that we couldn't think about. There is a phrase from Churchill, which says that we shape buildings, and afterwards buildings shape us. And whoever is familiar with the panopticon, for example, has a good sense of what he meant. Well, it's true also of technology, right? So we design technology, and then technology design us, or shape us back. Artificial intelligence, all the suggestions, all the way in which it profiles the reality around us. Well, ethics is there to make sure that, one step back, when we design technology, we will design it and we will use it in such a way that when technology shapes us, it shapes us in the best possible form or place that we might think of. It's a long answer, I know, but I'm passionate about it.
We will come back to cybersecurity and so on. But first, just something more general. Everyone knows that Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple rule the internet. What can Europe do to rule back a bit, or to regulate? They start, I mean, it was started, there was a kind of start, but it's not enough. What do you think? They are working on that, I think, in just in these days.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of debates just recently, yesterday, I think, about breaking up Facebook.
Monopoly. Yeah.
Yeah, monopoly. And that's an aspect. I mean, these actors have become very powerful, very strong. There are two answers to your question. The first is this, that online service providers, Facebook, Google, Apple, they are a bit more than just providers. They design not just the internet, let's say the infosphere, let's say the whole environment in which we live. And in designing it, they decide what we can and cannot do. So I don't know, on Facebook you can share stories and posts, but you cannot write long essays. Or so they design affordances. And when you do that, you come with a strong responsibility, because in a society or in a reality like ours, where we depend so much on this technology to function and exist and prosper, those who design this technology, well, they de facto decide what is feasible and not feasible. So I think that side has to be clarified, and that it has to become clear that these companies have strong civic responsibilities with respect to the products that they put in place. The old debate about fake news, for example, and now eventually online service providers have come around to the idea that they need to provide some form of fact checking, because otherwise, through their service, democracies can be jeopardized. That's a good example of a welcome outcome. It took too long. It would have been easier and better if they would have come to senses a bit more earlier than that. On the other side, there is governance and power that the European Union or governments can exert on the internet or on digital innovation. In this case, I think that the European Union has done a lot of good steps in the right direction in two ways. The, let's say, negative and positive way. If you think about the GDPR, for all its fault, it's not a perfect regulation, but it's one of the best, if not the best in the world. And it has provided a strong landmark with respect to what can and cannot be done with the data, which is the key part of all this technology. The GDPR is a landmark in many ways, because it reaffirms the human dignity as a center for European values. It protects privacy, and is also a piece of regulation that is able to stay up with its time, because it does, for the first time, something that was very much needed. It decouples territoriality from sovereignty. So European data, the data of European citizens, will have to be treated according to the GDPR, even if these data are going to be stored in the US or in some other countries in the world. So this is an important step, because it plays or goes in the same direction of the digital technologies. The other side is the proactive side, the propositive side. So what do we do with this technology? Because that's the other step of the regulation. How do we use them to support societies? And if you think about, I don't know, the European Union, they now have these twin transitions, the digital transition and the green revolution, and understanding that the two things can go hand in hand, for example, and prompting with fundings and initiatives, this kind of merging is a great step in that context. So sorry, again, a long answer, but I think there are 3 points there. So there are duties and responsibilities for tech companies, which we need to start to identify and enforce. The European Union is perhaps one of the best places, if not the best place among democratic countries and cultures, to establish some serious governance of the digital, for the GDPR, but also for the propositive strategies, which are the ones that are going to take us to the next step of our societies.
Yeah, so we have the next question is also related, it's about data. So now, it's Christmas, people are buying stuff, and we know that Alexa, smart toys, wearables, they all steal, or let's say collect our data. But I read that even smart dust or cosmetics take our DNA, or can take our DNA. And even the Corona app, everyone was so taking care about not to deliver our data to public agencies. But the data gets stored by Apple. So is there any way we can protect ourselves?
So data is what everybody's looking for. Somebody says it's the new oil. I'm not too sure about that analogy, but yes, it's the new precious source that we all want. And we become aware of its value very late, let's say, with respect to the past 20 years. One element in Europe, I think the GDPR is something that we have to keep in mind, because it offers important protection. It stresses not only the needs for consent, but also what can be done with data once data are being collected. And that's also very, very, very important. But the digital has a peculiarity, it's malleable. Some colleagues of mine will say it's greasy, so it's hard to maintain control over the whole thing. So for all it's like a strength, the GDPR, I'm sure that loopholes and ways of going around it can be found. So one other thing to consider there is a little bit of awareness and a little bit of education, so I would say literacy about what the internet is or what digital technologies are and how they really work. I'm a bit cautious in stressing this point, because there is the other side of the coin. Being educated, knowing how digital technologies work is important, is crucial, because this is an infrastructure that is going to stay in our societies, in our reality, and we need to know how it's designed, what it's for, and who rules it. But also we have to make sure that the responsibility that big tech companies behave correctly in offering their services does not fall on the shoulders of customers. I need to be aware of what the conduct on the streets are, but I'm not asked to check that the bus on which I jump is safe, or that the driver is driving it in a correct way. So we have to be careful that digital literacy does not become a way of offloading responsibility on the single user. Make sure that it's up to us to make sure that our data are not stolen. There has to be
exactly. Yeah. A part of the internet operates in secret, the darknet. It's a home for Bitcoin, but also for a huge amount of criminal energy. Your thoughts on that?
It's the equivalent of the dark roads or the dark streets in our city. In the internet, there is this. If you consider the internet from a security or a defense point of view, there are two things to consider. One is that it's much easier and much more convenient to attack than defend, because whoever is attacking or committing a criminal act is quite unlikely to be caught, and so you might get away with it. And attacking is going to be quite likely to be successful. So if I decide to attack a system, provided I have enough means in terms of skill and time, I might succeed. So this means that the incentives to behave badly with respect to the incentive of not doing so are much higher. And so the fight against the criminals will never be done. I mean, it's never done, right? So you never win definitely against crime or against the evil. But in cyberspace, it's more convenient to be a criminal. So the dark web offers the right place for it. We should also keep in mind that the dark web is also a place where a lot of important organizations in terms of support to democracy's rights, human rights, can organize themselves in contexts where democratic values are not upheld. So dark is not necessarily bad, but it serves two purposes. And that's important to stress, because it goes back to the point of the digital technologies and the internet in this case being an infrastructure that we need these days. Everybody needs it, whether it's like malicious actors, criminals, activists, scholars. how we use it makes a difference. And regulation is also very important. But let's say that there are some corners of the dark web which have proved very, very important in some other corners of the world to foster activism and democratic value. So it's not all bad.
So hackers are usually young men competing for glory, bragging around and leading a wild life. Is that a true picture?
Well, I'm not sure they lead a wild life, because the other stereotype is that they live off Pizza Hut and and some other form of junk food. I'm not sure. I think it's more like a Hollywood stereotype. I know a lot of women, girls and young women who have incredible talent and can contribute massively to the hacking culture or the hacking community in the contest, in specific context. But it is true that it has been and it is a male-dominated environment. More so because I'm not an hacker, and I'm not an anthropologist, so I don't know. I can offer like anecdotal experience, but you don't become a hacker because you take that curriculum at school. You become a hacker because someone introduced you to technology, and then somehow you prompted to develop that sorts of skills, and then find a way to use them in one way or another. And girls are not prompted in that direction. So I think that the bias in the hacker community reflects a bias in our societies more than anything else. It's been hard, I guess, from what I've read lately, to break that bias. But it's also true that there are more and more hackers, women hackers, who become famous for their skills, and they can lead communities these days. Several of them, I should say. But yes, the hacker community has been one corner in which, again, women have to fight twice or fight two battles, right? So one to be recognized and the other to show that they're good. Yeah, indeed.
But there are also ethical hackers.
Yeah, are not necessarily criminals or bad actors. Quite the contrary. So there is this distinction between black hat and white hat hackers, which is about hackers who attack to do criminal offenses, and white hat hackers who attack to show problems with systems and then make sure that they improve them. But it's not just that. Hackers are there in many cases to support civic organizations, to support activism. Hacktivism in itself is something that has to do with using digital means to participate in the political life of our societies. We might remember Anonymous supporting Occupy Wall Street, or Anonymous supporting the Arab Spring. The very first hacktivist movement, so those who would use the internet to launch attack, specific kind of attack, DDoS, denial of distributed systems attacks. Well, they started in Italy, I think it was 1995, in the context of the protest against the French nuclear experiment or nuclear tests in Mururoa. So activism has a long history and a long story of using digital means to support political fights and political battles. So they are not at all bad actors, quite the contrary. Let me just take the chance to remind our listeners here about Aaron Swartz. Aaron Swartz was an hacker, US citizen and student, who was working to make sure that publications, academic publications, so knowledge, would be freely available to whoever wanted to access it, and not behind a paywall. And so he hacked a system, a repository called JSTOR, where usually academic publications are stored and they are behind a paywall, to make it freely available to everybody. And he was just a young guy, and eventually he was doing that as an hacker. But because he breached copyright and international intellectual property laws, he'd been persecuted by the FBI and eventually convicted. The story is very sad because at the end, Aaron Swartz killed himself for too much pressure. And the problems that are being convicted and facing the idea of going to jail will cause. But it's a tragic example of hackers doing, yes, indeed, perhaps illegal operations, but that are not necessarily morally evil or morally bad.
Yeah. In your talk at our conference, Ethics and Digitalization, last October, you mentioned that during the pandemic, cyber attacks have increased exponentially. And yesterday, the European Medicines Agency was hit too. Why is that, that during the pandemic is there so much activity?
FireEye has been attacked, or declared to have been attacked. I think that is going back to the discussion we were having before on the data. So during the pandemic, the digital technologies have become like a necessary mean. Everything now is done by a computer, whether it's education, conference, research, you name it. So this means that there are more data to be acquired, and data is what everybody wants. It also means that several systems had to scale up in a very short amount of time. And so when you do that, it's likely that security is not really at the top level. And so you have like security, which is not perfect, a lot of data that you want to acquire. It's the perfect combination for malicious actors to launch attack, because you can acquire data, better data, more data, perhaps in an easier way. So it's, I think during the pandemic, the rise of criminal activity in cyberspace during the pandemic, if anything, it shows us that the digital has become even more crucial, and there is a lot of potential there, which we need to guard much better than we do these days.
Just to give an idea, how many cyber attacks are going on now?
Well, now you never know, because it's
no, I mean today, in one day, or something statistically.
No, it's the average. I think there was 2018 that in the first 6 months, and this I think will give you a sense. Gemalto reported that in the first 6 months of 2018, there were 4.7 billion records being stored, and that's quite huge, because the data about cyber attacks, they come every 6 months or every year, and depends on what people declare and don't declare. But just to give you a sense, in 2017, the amount of data stolen or attacked was about 2.7 billion. And the year after, in the first 6 months, the amount went to 4.7 or 4.8 billion. So this means that there are like a huge quantity of attacks which are successful, and which are quite exponentially growing amount of data, posing serious threats then to our security, personal security, because data we are considering here are personal data, so then they lead to identity theft, or industry secret, so leading to worse competition on the market, or security secret, you name it. So attacks on the data don't stay in the digital; they have a strong repercussion on the reality in which we live.
Yeah, exactly. What happens in cyberspace is not only virtual. So if we take tools of surveillance, they can track and identify us, but are almost completely unregulated. So there is now the idea that they should be defined as weapons, actually, in order to be regulated.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. It's problematic because cyber weapons are not regulated either, and it's very hard to understand what a cyber weapon is. So it's not a given that if you treat them as cyber weapons, you might regulate them. And if you treat them as weapons, you might inflate the regulation for kinetic weapons or physical weapons. You might also make it create a problem on the other side. I think that some regulation is needed, and is needed with respect to specifically the tracking, and some of the tracking that is done for security reasons as well. And it's a regulation that needs to be. So let me just take a step back, because otherwise it's not clear. So there is this sense that to fight or to ensure security of the internet, you need to improve surveillance, and that's a false myth. To improve security on the internet, we need better protocols, better design, better standards for the internet in and on itself, and education for the users. Surveillance measures in terms of monitoring, they are relevant, but only up to a certain level, because monitoring will allow you to identify an attack which is coming. It doesn't allow you to stop the attack. It doesn't allow you to prevent the attack. So it's very limited. So there is an effect, let's say, an approach which is skewed towards surveillance, which is not effective and proves wrong. We need to regulate surveillance not only in the context of cybersecurity measures. We need to regulate surveillance in every context in which there is some form of data collection, because the risk is not anymore. We should not confuse the risk anymore with the idea that, well, I'm monitored all the time, so we now know what do I buy or where do I go. We face a context in which the monitoring becomes something that can hinge upon our autonomy. And so those data are collected not to know what I'm doing now, but to understand how to make me do something different in 6 months from now. And that's why it's worrying. And so, yes, there is need for control, but it's a need that I think has to, regulation, that has to focus a lot on the data, not just on the technology in itself. It's not just the cyber surveillance approach that has to be regulated. It's the collection of data in whatever context.
We are back there. And how important is cybersecurity to geopolitics? Just to have an...
Fundamental. It's fundamental because data are becoming an asset which is traded internationally. And if it's traded, you need to protect it, because if it's not protected, you cannot trade it, because the other countries could acquire it in other ways. So cybersecurity is fundamental in that sense. Cyber defense in the sense of protecting national infrastructure from attacks coming from other countries is also crucial. And it's crucial for stability, because at the moment what we don't have is regulation for state behavior in cyberspace. So let's say that as long as an attack does not cause massive physical damage, there is no regulation to uphold. Because of this lack of regulation, it's quite likely that if you take some context where tensions escalate, the cyber attacks might lead to kinetic attack, to physical attacks, and that might pose problems in terms of stability. So cyber defense in terms of making sure that national critical infrastructures are robust, but also regulation of the way states can defend themselves in cyber, they are essential to maintain stability as it is. The example I often give is in a couple of cases last year and the years before, some Russian groups have entered into critical infrastructure of the US, a nuclear plant and I think some electric grid. And they stayed in the systems for almost 8 months, going unnoticed. And then eventually, in one case, they were discovered, in the other, they were themselves, making the announcement, just to show that the Russians have these capabilities. All good, because it all stopped there. But imagine if things had not stopped there, in a context where there is no regulation, but the consequences can be really disastrous. So it's important for the countries to ensure that their infrastructures are secure, but also that we have regulations to make sure that we can control reactions if things go wrong.
And how can individuals and companies protect themselves?
So individuals it's important that we're all aware of the technology we're using. So it's digital technologies have entered our houses in a kind of a quiet and naive way. Oh yes, it's a computer. Oh yes, Google is for free. Zoom is for free. We need to become aware of what is the potential, but also the risks of this technology. So become wiser users. Companies, they need to invest in cybersecurity. It's crucial. I argued in an article a few years ago that cybersecurity has become a public good because it's a necessary condition for digital technologies to work, and technologies are crucial for our societies. And this is problematic because maintaining security in cyberspace is a costly process. You need constant skill, you need constantly updated tools, which means money. And not all the time, companies and providers of digital technologies can afford that level of security. If you think about the Internet of Things, which is now about to come or become a permanent phenomenon, the Internet of Things is a context in which the fridge is connected, the car is connected, the computer is connected, the TV is connected. Not all these devices come at a sufficient price on the market, or that would allow the provider to have high level of security. In order to be cheap, the companies will have to save money from somewhere, and security might be one of these aspects. So this is another conundrum for our societies. How do we make sure that companies can be competitive on the market while also selling products which are up to standard in terms of security? So nobody wants a fridge or a television that can be hacked and used to spy on us, as it was with Samsung, I think, TV a few years ago, or that might explode, or whatever you can imagine. And so the question, it is unpolite to answer to a question with another question, but the question I would pose is, how do we make sure that private companies can keep up with the level of security that is required in our societies? We need investment, we need standards, we need certifications. It's time for us to act in that direction.
Yeah. And how are ethics applied to cybersecurity?
In many, many ways. I think that if we distinguish between cyber defense, so the international relations, and cybersecurity, so the maintaining of an infrastructure, secure, robust, there are many ways. One key debate, we touched upon it before, is this friction between surveillance and privacy, which is something that is important in security, not just in cybersecurity. How much do we control in order to maintain something secure? But there are also other aspects. One aspect, for example, just to focus on specific or current topics, is the use of AI for cybersecurity. We know that AI, it has a great potential to perform a lot of cybersecurity tasks. For example, the monitoring of systems to identify an attack, or building systems which are more robust. There is a process that engineers go through, which is called the verification and validation, which is a tedious, long process. AI can do that in a quicker and more efficient way. But when you use AI, you also have ethical questions. So one question is, at which point the monitoring of a system becomes a form of surveillance? And now we make sure that that doesn't happen. If we use AI to verify and validate, and AI makes a mistake, who's responsible for that mistake? How do we ascribe responsibility? What kind of skills we want to retain as skills that humans can perform, even when AI can perform those sorts of risks? So this is one set of questions. Other sets of questions have to do with how do we distribute security, as it were. And this is not immediately intuitive, but a lot of the technology that we develop requires high standards to be secure, and that requires money and fundings. Some countries can afford support that kind of levels of securities, others might not, but they might also acquire digital infrastructures and tools. So how do we make sure that societies which are not that rich or not advanced in acquiring digital technologies are not acquiring more vulnerabilities, more weak points? And so this is another important question to consider. And then there is one which is not merely ethical but also legal, which has to do with the attribution of responsibility. It's not so much about security, but it's about accountability. When things go wrong in the context of cyber, it's very hard to attribute responsibility. And we need to find ways of resolving this conundrum, because otherwise we risk to use a technology for which there is no accountability.
I know it's late, but vielleicht can you tell us a little about the mission of digital ethics? Okay,
that's a very nice question. I mean, given the way we started this conversation, of course, digital ethics is there to change the world very ambitiously. But I see very much like this. So I see digital ethics as an area of research where ethics or philosophy and lawmaking and policymaking and engineering get in touch one with another. and ethics becomes a way in which we can inform or shape the other two. This is not something new. So it's, if you think about democratic values, or our societies are ruled on the basics of fundamental moral values. And so the point when it comes to digital societies is to understand what are the values that we want to build and how we translate those values in the technology. And to do that, we need engineers and we need policymakers. But I really see the role of digital ethics as the, let me put it this way, digital ethics is not a map to understand digital technologies. It's not just giving us a chart. Digital ethics is the shovel with which we're going to build the area of digital societies. So it's a tool to build. It's not just a tool to observe. I'm not sure whether that conveys the meaning, but to me it's much something to shape reality once we have understood it.
So it should be at the start there, together with the engineering and
it should be at the start, but it's not just at the start. That's the other thing. So the technology that we see these days is a technology that evolves and changes. Consider AI, again, artificial intelligence. We design AI, we develop AI, and then we use it. But AI learns once it's been deployed, and it changes its behavior once it's been deployed. In many cases, we cannot predict what AI is going to come out with. It's naive to think that if we fix the ethics of AI at the beginning, then we don't have to think about it anymore later on.
Of course.
Not true. We have to keep things in check all the time. You might remember Tai, the Twitter bot that Microsoft released. It was released in 2016, I guess, to contribute to the traffic of the internet. It took 16 hours to become Nazi, misogynist, racist. He learned from the worst actors on earth, humans. We need to keep AI in check, so you need to be there all the time. And so digital ethics or ethical considerations for digital technologies need to be there since the beginning, but not just at the beginning, all the way through, because technology changes, adapts, and so do we. So there is a constant trade-off between values, interests, opportunities, which needs to be reassessed all the time. It's like to think that you can have technology only at the beginning. It's very much like to think in this way about children. You have a child and you educate him or her very well, and you make sure that you tell them all the nice and important things to abide to in life. And then when they are 18, you're just like, okay, it's hands off. I told you whatever you need to know. I made sure to tell you all the right thing. Now you go and you're going to be a perfect human being. Well, that's not true. I mean, you need to be there all the time. And with digital technologies, it's the same. We need to be on our guard all the time. Mostly, and then I'll stop. Not so much or not only because of the risks, because the risks are, you mitigate the risks, because of the missed opportunity. Digital technologies change the world. They give us a super powerful tool to understand reality, improve reality. Think about the use of AI for climate change, or the use of AI to understand Alzheimer's disease or cancer or diabetes 2. Making sure that we don't miss out on this opportunity is the biggest challenge we face these days. We won't live 200 years, but I would date to be 200 years old and, switching on whatever media they will have by then and saying, well, we still have Alzheimer's because they didn't take up on the chances of using AI 200 years ago to fix it. That's the kind of challenge that we have. And ethics is there also for that, to make sure that we don't miss out, because then the generational responsibility will be huge.
Talking about challenges, there is something really incredible, incredibly negative. Women experience extreme hostility in the internet, on the internet. What can we do about that? I mean, this is really, okay, because it is anonymous, because you can comment, but there is a huge amount of energy going in that direction. How do you explain that?
Again, I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist, but I think that the internet, so there is a nice phrase from, I think it's a US Supreme Justice 30 years ago. He said, well, the internet makes all of us pamphleteer. Is a phrase mentioned in another context, but the internet gave visibility. Women who couldn't speak, who couldn't connect, who couldn't be there and show themselves, they now can, for better, for worse. It's like, from the grandmother to the activist. And that it's irritating, right? Because everybody has the same voice. And if you are not thinking correctly about the fact that it's okay for everybody to have the same voice, that might be problematic. And then it's anonymous, and then it becomes evident that you can exert violence by words, which is even less problematic perhaps than doing that in physical way. So that gives a lot of opportunities to, I don't know whether it's just men, but I would say people who are minded in the wrong way to exert a violent behavior. One of the key things is that, yeah, the internet gives an opportunity and to express, for women to express themselves and acquire information. The solution can be regulatory, so it's like identify these people and secure them to justice. But I think it's not, that's a remedy, it's not a solution. To have that phenomenon to stop, we need to change the mindset of the people in our societies. And that only comes with education, that only comes with constant effort. It's not that the problem is not that people express violent words against women or every other category on the internet. The problem is that people think that it's okay to be violent in any possible way against other people. And that's, I'm afraid, has much deeper roots than I would like to have as a phenomenon. And it's going to take a long time to fix it. But we're working on it. We're not going to stop.
Exactly. You are working on ethics for post-digital societies. Can you tell something about that? Just
well,
is there also some idea how to educate civil
so yeah, exactly.
civilization? Yeah.
Post-digital societies are the societies in which is different from post-truth societies. Now, when we think about post-truth societies, we think about societies where truth doesn't count anymore. That's not it. Post-digital societies are societies in which the digital will stop to be an innovation because it will have become a thread of the reality in which we live. Something that is in the background, but it's still there and it's still very necessary. The usual example is electricity. So we don't have conferences anymore about electricity. We don't consider electricity like an innovation. But if electricity doesn't work, well, we cannot go about our day. So the post-digital societies are, for me, the arrival point where all this transformation and revolution is taking us, right? So what the societies will be, we're deciding it today. And so for me, the work on post-digital societies is a work that is shaped by the idea of making sure that we can have technology, governance, but also values that respect the idea of plurality, of diversity, of tolerance, of justice, even of condemning uses of violence, whether it's physical or not. But it's not so. When I talk about post-digital societies, I'm not thinking about the ideal society, so to speak, but I'm thinking about what can we do now that we have this kind of blob, not yet in any shape, so that when we forget about the blob, we are in the right place. So it's not an utopian place, but it's more of a process, and I'm very worried about the process that will take us there. But so far, we got it wrong in many ways, so we're not doing that well.
Okay, there is much to do. So this is, for me, also very important. You have diverse roots and are at home in different cultures. And studies show that this activates more parts of the brain and improves performance. What is your personal perception?
Well, I'm constantly underperforming, if you ask me. I don't know. I think that there is a value, and I can say this from personal experience, but mostly observing colleagues and students who are absolutely brilliant, there is a value in having different routes, or at least to know that things can be done in different ways, because then you can choose in which way to approach any specific situation. I believe that diversity and plurality are per se good things and valuable things in whatever form they are implemented. And having the possibility of merging different cultures, different approaches, that's a fantastic and enriching experience. If not for one thing, because they allow you to doubt whatever solution is posed in front of you. And I would not be a true philosopher if I didn't appreciate the value of doubting, going back to Descartes. So, questioning, and when people, all the people that do something in one way, and that there is another way, and you must say, but is that the right way? Perhaps it is, but questioning is crucial, and it doesn't come if you don't know different things. So yes, it's a value, indeed a value.
Yeah, thank you for all those fascinating insights. Do you have a message for our users?
Well, I have two. One is it's always worth asking why. Because understanding, and you asked me what is the value of science? Understanding, scientific understanding, but understanding of things, it's what makes humans humans, and what paves the way to compassion, to empathy, to science, to progress, whatever, all the things I consider valuable. And the second is respect. Respect, this is one lesson that I think we've learned from the pandemic. It sounds rhetorical by now, but I mean, with Luciano, we've been reading and writing about respect and care since day one, like 2005, I guess. We're part of an environment in which many bits are more connected or more strongly connected than we would expect. And being able to face this environment not from an anthropocentric or an egocentric perspective, but from the perspective of caring for the other, caring for the environment, caring for the connection, well, that might take us in a better place. And it's very hard to do it. I fail to do that all the time. But ideally, that should be the thing. Move the perspective from the ego to the I or the me, towards the us, towards the environment, the other. Because otherwise, it will be more problematic as time goes by. And if you could have a wish, what would it be? Just for you, a vision, an impact, and well, if it was a wish for myself or for society, for yourself. For myself, well, I like to be much more sharp than I am, I confess it. Being able to be super sharp, understanding things and going vertical and get to the kind of bit that always escapes me and drives me crazy when I'm trying to write a paper or that sorts of things. That would be great. If I had a second wish, the second wish would be to become more empathic and understanding better the people around me. But I know that the second wish is even harder than the first one, I guess. I mean, you are already a superwoman. What would you want? but empathy is something I think it's something that can definitely be developed a bit more, at least for as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Thank you so much for your time and for your work. Thank you so much, Clara. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.